Welcome to Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, a podcast for all you wine lovers who, if you're like me, just cannot get enough of the good stuff. I'm Yanina Dore, your host, brand ambassador, wine educator, and sommelier. So stick with me as we dive deeper into this ever-evolving, wonderful world of wine. And wherever you are listening to this, cheers to you. Hello, wine friends, and welcome back to another episode of my mini-series on South Africa. And as promised, I'm taking us to Elgin. Elgin is this beautiful, cool climate wine region with diverse terroir, biodiversity. It produces amazing Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's accessible from Cape Town, so you can easily get there for a day trip or a weekend getaway. And I am talking with Andries, the winemaker of Paul Cluver. And as Paul Cluver is the pioneer of this wine region, who better than to discuss with them? So there's going to be a big focus on Pinot Noir. So we'll be talking about the importance of oak usage, how to bring out the grape's natural characteristics, how to not overpower, walking through the process of making the very best Pinot Noir from harvest through to bottling. Of course, you will know all about this wine region, Elgin, by the end of it. And there's so much to know about the conservation initiatives of this winery. Paul himself is an absolute superhero. So you will find out about this very incredible man. And I'm sure you will be diving to get yourself a bottle of Chardonnay or Pinot from this winery. So enough of this introduction. I am going to go over to the chat with Andries now. So, Andries, I want you to tell me a little bit more details and everybody listening how you personally ended up working at Paul Cluver, because it's been a few years now, hasn't it?
Yes, it's just completed the 27th vintage year.
Yes.
So I studied enology and viticulture at University of Stellenbosch and started making wine at a winery called Nederburg. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Paul Cluver Wines was in a joint venture with, which was then Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, which owned Nederburg, which was until recently Distel, which is now bought by Heineken.
Oh God, that was a whole load of boom.
Yes. So, but, I was a winemaker at Nederburg, and the grapes from this property went there.
Okay.
It also happens that I met my wife when
I like this part.
When I was studying enology and viticulture. Mm-hmm. So Inge and I got married in 1995, when I was a winemaker at Nederburg. Mm-hmm. And then one day my father-in-law came to me and he said to me, does the grapes from a cool climate area, which is totally different to Paul, where Nederburg was situated. Uh-huh. And I said, well, at that stage, Nederburg is a very big winery. It was very corporate. And obviously I said, no, if you want to make better wine, you've got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And so in 1996, we started the building of the cellar, and my father-in-law approached me and asked me whether I would be interested in coming to make the wine here on the property. And the rest is, as they say, is a bit of history, So I joined the business in end of 96 for the completion of the winery. And then in 1997 was the first vintage, that we made here on the property.
And this is interesting because I went around with your father-in-law, the Dr. Paul Cluver, who we'll touch on. I mean, he is a force to be reckoned with. He's amazing. He was telling me, I think, that you originally planted Bordeaux varieties here in Elgin, where Elgin, of course, is now famous for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but you were kind of the first people there. But it was all different plantings. Did I remember that correctly?
That's correct. Yeah, we were the first to plant commercial vineyards in the valley. There was a couple of experimental vineyards, but we were the first to plant, vineyards on a commercial scale. And the first vineyards that was planted was Chardonnay, Riesling, and Gewürztraminer, which was then followed by Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, and Cabernet Sauvignon, and then later on we also planted Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and even Shiraz. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things of being a pioneer is we had to try it. We had to try everything because, it was a total unknown. And, if we look at climate data and things like that, we sort of in between Burgundy and Bordeaux. And the only difference was, because it's so cool, and the later it gets in the season here, the colder it gets. So the Cabernet never fully, sort of only in warm vintages did the Cab and the Merlot and the Cab Franc and even the Shiraz ripen properly.
Yeah,
the wines always had austerity to it, which the Americans called thin and weedy. Sort of was too herbal. It was too herbal and green for them. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, in South Africa, the trend was your flagship wine is a blend.
I didn't realize. Okay.
Yeah, it was sort of a trend. Everybody's flagship wine was a blend, and we thought. We're also going to make a blend. And we went as far, because I worked at Chateau Margaux, and we even got Paul Cluver from Chateau Margaux to come out and taste with us.
Yes. I mean, that's what I wanted to touch on. I love that, but we'll get to that in a second. So, so he comes out and tastes your blend. What was your blend?
We're thinking of making a blend. So he tasted all the individual components, the Cabs and the Merlot and the Cab Franc and the stuff, And his response was, "This is okay," and then our response is, "Listen, we don't just want to be okay; we want to be amazing." And my brother-in-law just read the book Good to Great, and he was quoting the author and said, "No, we want to be great." And Paul Pontelier's response was, "Young man, you have to walk before you can run."
Very wise. Mm-hmm. And
then he said, "You guys also make Pinot Noir, so let's just taste the Pinot Noir. Let's give our palate a rest and taste a bit of Pinot Noir, from border varieties." And after the second sample or barrel, he was like, "Wow, this is something great." And my response was, "You're not qualified. You're from Bordeaux.
You don't know about Pinot Noir."
And his reply was, "My wife is from Paris. She loves Burgundy, and she, so at night, in the evenings we drink Burgundy at home." And he said, "Well, this is, here you're onto something." And it was literally the very next year we stopped making, all the other varieties and focused only on Pinot Noir. And I think it's a great thing because with our climate, in a year like in a vintage like this vintage, border varieties is a disaster.
Yeah.
Because, you just couldn't ripen them.
Yes.
And for us, that's a great thing, that we, it gives us focus. And slowly but surely, Elgin is already established as the region for Chardonnay in South Africa and also now Pinot Noir. If you talk Elgin, you think Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
So how did it get there? Because you said you were the pioneers.
Yeah.
From that moment on, did you just plant a lot more Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and then the reputation has preceded it? Or, how is it so famous now for Pinot Noir and Chard?
I think, it's firstly, it started with us focusing on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, making that the business focus. Obviously, you need more role players in the industry or the region to do that. And fortunately, there's a lot of well-known winemakers, the likes of Neil Ellis, Giles Webb at Thelema, coming and sourcing grapes from the valley. It went so far that Thelema actually acquired a property in the valley. And then also Richard Kershaw coming into the valley to focus on Chardonnay. So, it started with us focusing on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and then the other role players in the valley or people coming and sourcing, Chardonnay from this valley, that's partly also assisted in driving that focus.
And you mentioned that actually, if you were going to compare Elgin, the region, it's somewhere between Burgundy and Bordeaux, hence why you were trying to actually plant a whole variety of different cultivars and grape varieties.
Yes.
How would you describe to somebody who has no idea where Elgin is in South Africa and has no idea of the terroir and the climate, how would you let somebody know more about the region?
Okay, so Elgin is literally in our east, slightly southeast of Cape Town. And one thing that is unique about the Elgin Valley is that we are on an inland plateau, but only about 15 miles, well, our property is only about 15 miles from the ocean. So we're on an elevated plateau, and the other interesting thing is that we are totally surrounded by mountains.
It is incredible.
You've got to drive over a mountain pass to get to the valley and also exit the valley. So the total valley is surrounded by mountains. Especially in summer, the most persistent wind in summer in the Western Cape is actually the southeaster. And the southeaster blows or brings in moist, cool air from off the Atlantic Ocean. And then actually, as it hits the mountains and rises, it condensates because the higher you go, cooler it becomes. Yeah. And then we get this cloud cover over the valley. So what you'll find is that in Elgin, it'll be a cloudy, overcast day. You drive to Somerset West, which is 25 minutes driving.
In Stellenbosch, just for everybody.
Or Stellenbosch. There won't be a cloud in the sky. It will be, it will be a, moderately warm day, but whereas in Elgin it's cool. I found temperatures in excess of 10 degrees difference between midday temperatures in Stellenbosch versus Elgin.
Oh my God, yeah.
And the other advantage is mostly, coastal winds goes and dies down in the evening, and what happens then the sky clears again. And the net effect, because we're on an elevated plateau, is that we get big diurnal differences. So what we have is moderate day temperatures and cold nights. And that's always great for flavor and color development. And that makes it quite unique, And then from a soil perspective, South Africa's got some of the oldest viticultural soils in the world.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
Meaning it's mineral rich but nutrient poor. So what we have is we've got to do we actually do a lot of regenerative farming. We don't till the soil, we plant with no tilling. So we've got practices in place to actually increase the organic matter through planting special cover crops. We don't plant mono cover crops, we plant mixtures, and things. And also we plant nitrogen fixers so that we don't have to use artificial nutrients. So there's a lot of things like that what we do. But the advantage to having a nutrient poor soil is that we don't get excessive growth. What we have is we have natural lower yields, but we have much more balanced growth in the vineyards, which is an advantage.
So it's sounding rather ideal for me.
Yeah.
This is why your wines taste so delicious. Question on the nitrogen fixers, just because I know my head goes, well, what is a good nitrogen fixer? I think other people listening might be asking the same thing.
That's things like Fetch, Medics, and Clovers.
So Clovers, I've heard of that. And what's the first thing you said?
Fetch and Medic. Fetch is a type of plant. Medics as well. Yeah, so they're all plants.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so when you plant cover crops, you want to plant a cereal because that gives you volume and fiber.
Okay.
And then you want to plant a nitrogen fixer because that fixes nitrogen in the soil. And the other thing that we plant is we plant a mixture with root vegetables like turnips or Japanese radishes because they actually then break the soil.
Wow, okay, that makes sense. So then you're aerating, right? Yeah, aerating,
exactly. And then also none of these gets harvested. They just are, either rolled or mowed, and all that material, organic material, stays in the vineyard.
Oh, so no one gets the turnips?
No, but nobody gets the turnips or the radishes. No, because what is amazing to see is where they've died, all the nutrients that they actually goes back into the soil. And it's amazing to see the mycorrhiza growing in the soil, because what you want is you want a living soil. You want to have a lot of organisms. And that's what you get by doing that.
Love that. That's so interesting. Well, we're going to talk about... No, we're going to... Do you know what? We're going to do it now. So you mentioned all these different regenerative farming techniques. Paul Cluver, the winery, is known for all the conservation initiatives. And so when Dr. Paul Cluver himself took me out, and how old is he now? Or how young is he now?
He's a very young 81. He'll be 82 this year.
Yeah, and sprightly still. So he took me in one of your Jeeps out into the middle of the farm. We went up near some mountains and he like jumps out and he's marching along on this kind of, almost like trekking path and showing me things. I was like, gosh, I've never seen an 81-year-old move in the way that he does. It's incredible.
Yeah, he still walks about 10 miles every day.
10 miles. Oh my gosh. And what's it like working with him? And what's it been like? Because he has actually received a lot of recognition, hasn't he, for his conservation initiatives?
Yes, I mean, earlier this year he got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Wildlife Foundation for all the conservation work that he's done in South Africa. He's won the Green Personality from Drink's Business a couple of years ago. So he's been very, very instrumental in a lot of the conservation efforts on the property. It's an honor to work with somebody like that.
I can imagine.
He's not only achieved a lot in the medical field because he's actually a neurosurgeon.
Yes, I know.
But then, he's also achieved a lot in the agricultural business. Received, a honorary doctorate from the University of Stellenbosch for his contribution to agriculture. But then on the conservation side, he's actually just lucky as ahead of his peers, of what they do. And he's always got the greatest vision of things, so he's a visionary leader, in that sense.
And how much land do you have?
So I'll give it to you in acres because you guys work in acres.
Yeah, acres is fine, yeah. But okay. Everyone can convert. So
the property is just under 2,500 hectares, which is about 5,000 acres, and but more than 1,000 hectares, so more than 2,000 acres, is in conservation.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it?
It's
and
insane. So it includes mountain, but what is really interesting is that a lot of farmland encroaches onto mountainous areas, but there's very little transition zones that's in conservation. So that's the zones between the mountain and farmland. On our property, we've got a large part, probably about 300-400 hectares of transitional land that is in conservation. And that is really special.
Honestly, it's an amazing place. And anybody, this is what was so cool, and I'm coming back to you guys, is that
you're more than welcome.
Thank you. You've allowed part of your land for people to do this kind of special hike, but it's not a normal hike. It's like glamping, but glamping hike, right? It's like 3 or 4 days and people just walk constantly, but then they stay in luxury properties and eat really nice food, right? It's something like this.
Yes.
Does it have a name?
Yes, it's called slapbacking.
Slapbacking, yes.
It's the Green Mountain route. So it's basically in the mountain behind our property is called, in Afrikaans, which it's called the Groenlandberg, which basically it's the Greenland mountain, if you translate it directly. So it's basically, there's a conservancy and so they basically walk around the mountain and with a nature conservation guide. So you only have to have a day pack with you. You start on the other side of the mountain and you walk through the conservation area for 3 days. And obviously you stop for a wine tasting and a lunch at our restaurant.
Which is delicious. Which is so delicious. The food was so, so, so good. Anyway, carry on.
Super. So you basically stay in the same guest house, in a luxury guest house for, the same time, but you walk around and you see the difference, because one thing that is amazing about the Western Cape, in the area that we live in this area, this is the area that with the most diverse plant species in the world.
Of course, yes.
In a square kilometer, you can find more than 1,000 different plant species, but they also change. So on the top of the mountain, you'll have a total different group of plants than lower lying areas. So it's actually fascinating walking with somebody that's really knowledgeable and they can tell you all the differences of the different plants. So it's amazing,
honestly,
and also to see the diversity is amazing.
It's on my list. It is. And then also, because I was only there for a few hours. Are you still doing music in the forest?
Well, COVID sort of stopped that a little bit. the plans are that we'll start again. It's just a question of when, and we need to spend a bit of money on the amphitheatre, so get it back to the standard. And but that's the plan.
But it's amazing. You have that amphitheatre in the forest. That's another thing for everyone who is coming down. Like, these are the sort of things that you've done or you can do. So there's the walks, there's the hikes, there's the beautiful wine, the restaurant. And it's cute in the restaurant. There's like a little library area for reading as well. And you can buy books. It's everything about it. It's a beautiful place. And am I right in remembering? So not only is Dr. Paul Cluver a neuroscientist, he's set up this winery, he's doing all his conservation efforts, but also he puts his hand to carpentry. Like, I was sat at a wooden table that he had carved and made, right?
Yes. His hobby is making tables and stuff, He can't sit still. So, he always has to have something to keep him busy.
It's amazing. And of course, we're not talking about, you've got your apple trees as well, your orchards. And so it's just a really beautiful place to just take an afternoon and just switch off, isn't it? It's lovely. And you feel the family vibe. And it's amazing that you, after, is it 27 harvests?
27 vintages, yes.
The winemaker, by default, totally part of the family as well. You're not allowed to leave, right?
No.
So, good answer. So, getting back to the wines, talking about Pinot Noir, if somebody, you've already described beautifully the Elgin region. To the east, right on the coast, you've got Walker Bay, for instance, which is another cool climate region, which will be doing Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Is there big differences between the two, if somebody was wondering, or even, again, other regions in Stellenbosch, or if you wanted to compare your Pinot Noir and Chardonnay to the rest of the world? What would you say?
So what is interesting about the differences between us and the Himalaya Valley, if we look at, which is now closer to us, what is interesting is there's a slightly more opulence in the wines from the Himalaya, both on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the tannin structure of Pinot Noir in the Himalaya Valley is slightly more broader. Whereas in Elgin, the tannin structure is slightly more linear. So what we've got is this slightly more finer but more linear structure to the Pinot Noir. Mm-hmm. And there's a slight more opulence, in the wines from the Himalaya. So that's one of the ways that I recognize the two, especially in the blind tasting, sort of Elgin. And what is interesting is if you compare Pinot Noir from Elgin to the rest of the world, if we, what you get is, for instance, in Oregon, you get immense fruit intensity,
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's a slight rusticity to the fruit profile in South African Pinot Noir, especially in Elgin and the Himalaya. In Oregon or in New Zealand, you'll get this massive bright fruit.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Whereas there's a slight more rusticity to the fruit profile, slightly more leaner in character, but at the end of the day, it's still beautifully balanced, and slightly understated, I would say.
Okay. No, I think that was a fantastic answer. Do you know what? I'm going to pour myself some wine. I want to... So for everybody... The wines that, if you want something unbelievably special, it is the Seven Flags Chardonnay and the Seven Flags Pinot Noir. These are super special. They're about £50 in the UK. They're not something you can just drink on a Monday night, unless you're feeling a little extra frisky. But what I do have today, which I think is really nice for you to also just hear me tasting, is much more of the weekly wines. So I've got a Village Chardonnay and I've got a Village Pinot Noir. So I'm going to pour myself now the Village Chardonnay 2022. But could you possibly talk about the Seven Flags for a second whilst I'm just having a little sip? How have you made something so spectacular? Obviously, I'm not tasting it today, but I can really vouch the power, the concentration, the elegance, the brightness of fruit, everything was sensational. So how did that come about?
So Seven Flags came about, actually, I referred earlier that we wanted to make a Bordeaux blend, as our flagship wine, and that's what Seven Flags was designed for, the label, everything. But when we started focusing on Pinot Noir, so, in 2006 was the first release of Seven Flags. It was Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, only followed in 2014. But Seven Flags is for us the ultimate expression of our terroir, so it'll be from the best and a lot of the time also the oldest. So it will be from the best vineyard sites. We will do a vineyard selection, vinify those parcels separately, and then do a barrel selection. From the Chardonnay, it's from the oldest Chardonnay vineyard on our property. It's actually one of the oldest vineyards on our property. It's also one of the oldest vineyards in Elgin, it's the oldest vineyard in the Elgin Valley, and also one of the oldest Chardonnay vineyards, which is now also part of the Old Vine project.
Ah, okay, cool.
So, so that vineyard is now 36 years old, which is young relative to, if you compare to Burgundy or, other places of the world. But what you have to remember is that the first Chardonnays was only planted in the first official plantings of Chardonnay was only in the beginning of the 1980s in South Africa. And this vineyard was planted in 1987. So it is one of the oldest Chardonnay vineyards in South Africa.
Okay, brilliant. That's amazing.
And for us, if I compare, because you've mentioned Village, and then we also have the estate. So we produce three different Chardonnays and Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Village, Estate, and Seven Flags. And what is interesting is there's no difference in approach in the winemaking between the estate and Seven Flags. It's just literally the vineyard site that gives so much concentration in minerality, which makes the wine special.
I have to say, it's nice actually, because this Chardonnay is really approachable. Super, super delicate touch of oak. There's just like this slight hint of vanilla, and but not even a toastiness, but there's just a slight, maybe suggestion of nuttiness, but really it's just about lovely fresh fruit. Are you putting it in a little bit of oak?
So the Village Chardonnay is actually a combination of large format oak, so it's foodress, 2,500 litre vats.
Yep.
Then since the 2022 vintage, we've introduced concrete eggs. And then
lovely. Okay.
Old barrels. So there's no new oak involved in the winemaking there. So it's normally, it's about just over 40% of foudre, and then the rest is, or equal percentage will be more or less old barrels, and then the rest will be split up between stainless steel and concrete eggs. And the whole idea with the Village is that young vineyards tend to give you varietal character, more than what they'll give you a sense of place.
Yeah.
For us, the Village is about embracing that varietal character, because the vines is just too young, so it's mostly young vineyards that ends up in those wines, and the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir. So we want to embrace the varietal character. There is not yet that sort of sense of place. So it doesn't mean that it's a simple wine. It's actually a very nice and complex wine, but much more fruit-driven, much more varietal-driven. And the idea is not to overcomplicate it with oak, because the structure of is just not going to handle it. Yeah.
Well, what I like, it's bright. It's got obviously all of this lovely lemon character. I get a lot of melon, actually. Like a greener melon
Winter
on
melon.
The nose.
Yes.
Ooh, there we go. But then the palate's lovely, kind of like a nice, just crunchy green apple. And I do get on the finish, even you were mentioning about kind of the terroir and it's not showing up, but a little bit of maybe whetstones.
It does.
Something, that little mineral edge.
Absolutely. Yes.
To
and
it.
And also, it's amazing the contribution that you get from the concrete egg. In that sense.
Oh, well, now, as a winemaker, talk to me, because I've been asking this question regularly, and I've already had in the last episode, actually, or last few episodes, people explaining how it kind of naturally moves your wine. So it brings it up and it kind of stirs it slowly, so you do get this texture. So I think people are now starting to understand what concrete eggs can do.
Yes.
But do you have something to add to that? Because, I think winemaking, people are really getting behind this.
When you say to people, there's a constant movement in the egg, you get this question, what the hell is he smoking? Kind of expression on the face. But the easiest way to explain it is actually you've got to look at the ocean, and the influence of the moon on gravity of the ocean, because we've got high tide and low tide, and that's basically due to the gravity, from the moon. And the same thing happens, sort of any sediment or lees in wine, will settle down with gravity. But now because we've got variance in gravitational forces from the moon, what you have is that actually it stays in suspension. You've got this constant movement. So for us, what is amazing to see is the textural element of a wine, from eggs. And you get almost the same effect in Foudre, because I've got oval Foudres, but it's not it's not the same. But, you get so much more textural elements in the wine that gives the wine sort of, just more texture to the wine. For us, I don't know if it's because it's, concrete, I find that I've got slightly higher salinity in the wine as well. Which adds to the complexity of wine, and I think eggs is a great tool. I don't think they're going to ever replace, small oak totally, but it does give the winemaker much more things to play around with and actually building blocks to build more complexity into the wines.
And I actually have to say, I mean, everyone, just this wine, I'm sorry, everyone, I've called it Village. How, basic. What a basic bitch I am. Sorry, this is Village. I love it. And we are talking about Burgundian varieties, are we not? So the Village Chardonnay, this is 2022. In Waitrose, everybody, this one is so easy to get your hands on. It's $13.99. So, again, this is a wine that you can drink during the week. But yes, it's a medium body wine, maybe even just slightly under. It's got brightness, it's got lightness, and it is just, like you said, it's not about that it's a simple wine, but it's actually got very nice, clean, for me, defined fruit flavours. Yes. So a little bit of that kind of lovely melon, a little bit of crunchy green apple, and also freshly squeezed lemon. It's not lemon curd, it's not whatever, but the texture, as you just said, it just gives that nice little mouth coating on the tongue. But it's not creamy at all. It's a bright, kind of lightish, fresh. It's a really fresh Chardonnay.
Yes.
It's lovely. It's really beautiful to drink, isn't it? So
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, can you walk me through, because I am going to go over to the Village, everyone, Village, Pinot Noir, which is vintage 2020 I have. But can you walk me through your winemaking process for Pinot Noir from harvest to bottling? Because let's be honest, Chardonnay's a little bit easier to deal with. Pinot Noir's a bit of a
heartbreak grape.
It is the heartbreak grape, absolutely. So yes, what do you do to make sure that you can preserve the delicate aromas and the flavours of Pinot Noir during your fermentation and aging?
Okay, well, obviously with Pinot Noir, it's harvest time is so crucial that you've got to be in the vineyards and make sure that you catch it on the right moment, because what you don't want with Pinot Noir is you don't want to overripe grapes, and then you get that sort of strawberry compote kind of jammy notes,
jammy,
which I think it just makes it more like a wine, not Pinot Noir, So for us, we try to have quite a long pre-maceration, cold maceration. And normally we have a cold maceration of 5 to 7 days. And during that time, we actually we have punch downs, but very little. The whole idea is just to keep the skin cake moist and keep it wet and make sure that we don't get any, nasty stuff starting to develop. And mostly the fermentation then starts spontaneous, anything from day 5 to day 7.
Okay.
Then we'll start with more serious punch downs. Depending on the vintage, depending on the extraction level, it's normally 2 or 3 punch downs in a day, manual punch downs.
So the workout, gym session.
Proper, yeah. On vineyard selections for 7 flags, we would sometimes have a percentage of, maybe about 20% whole cluster, which will be at the bottom of the tank. So we would...
A bit of semi-carbonic?
Correct, yeah. So we'll put the whole clusters at the bottom and then the rest of the grapes on the top. But that, so for me, a whole cluster ferment is really, really vintage dependent. You've got to have ripe stems, and I feel where it adds a spicy element to the wine, it's a positive. The minute it adds a herbal effect to the wine, it's a negative. You don't want that green.
Yes, okay.
Greenness from the tannins from the stems. You want ripe stems.
Would I say the reason that you wouldn't ever do a whole cluster in the village or in the estate is simply because you want the ripest fruit, the best fruit, and obviously the best fruit goes into the 7 flags. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Is that the reason? Okay.
That's the reason. And also, stems tend to, I find, if you taste wine from the same vineyard that one was partially fermented with stems, and the other one was fermented, everything destemmed. The wine where you fermented with stems is almost like 2 months slower in evolution.
Okay.
So the evolution of the wine is much slower because obviously you've got more tannin. You need more time with them, which is not a problem for Seven Flags, because I'm currently selling 2018, a wine that's 5 years old, whereas on Village we currently selling in South Africa 2022 already. So with Village you want much more approachable fruit early. With Seven Flags and Estate, you actually, I don't mind if it's, sort of slightly more austere when it's young, but it adds to the complexity of it.
Okay.
But then, so we basically, as far as possible, we run non-inoculated ferments. If we see, something's developing that I don't like, then I would inoculate to make sure that we have a complete fermentation. Because your benefit from a wild ferment or non-inoculated ferment is anyway in the first half of the fermentation.
Okay.
But 90% of the time, we don't need to add the yeast. We just run complete natural fermentation.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm not a big fan of too long post-maturation on the skins with Pinot Noir because Pinot Noir tend to go brown.
Yep.
So I'd rather keep that bright purple color of the wine. So normally, within 2 days after the fermentation is finished, we'll press. Malolactic is normally in barrel.
Okay, yep.
Especially for Estate and Seven Flags. Village will be either in large format oak or so that's 5,000 litre oak vats, or in stainless steel. Yeah.
And in terms of this specific Village, has it seen, again, you said a lot of it will be in stainless steel or large format. Has it seen, how much time?
No near oak. So there's no near oak. So about 60% of the wine would have been in older barrels. Older small oak barrels, but now we're talking third, fourth, and fifth fill. So there's no oak influence actually. And then also 5,000 litre oak vats as well.
Well, I have to say this is really interesting because the colour is very light. It's deceivingly light in a way, actually, for the concentration of fruit on the palate, which I think is lovely. And you already mentioned that you felt that maybe there's more of a rusticity or more of a. Did you say earthy or?
I did say rusticity. You're right. There's earthy notes to the wine. There's a mineral earthy note to the wine as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, so I'm getting obviously all of the red fruits, but again, I'm getting more of this kind of the cranberries edge, maybe wild strawberries. Yes. So I'm feeling like, again, the going to that more herbaceous side of the fruit rather than juicy, fresh fruit or overripe fruit and none of that. But then there's this really nice, slight earthy, almost slightly smoked toasty note, but it doesn't feel like it's toast from oak barrels. It's almost going into that, like even a suggestion of mushroom. But it's really interesting because, again, this is I've looked, this is in the website Vinum. You can get this for £14.30, or at Fine Wine Direct, if you're willing to get a case of 6, it's £77.70. Dive in, get 6 bottles. You'll be thanking me, and that works out as £12.95. So This is again a really Pinot Noir. The heartbreak grape is never. It's hard to get cheap Pinot Noir. Doesn't really exist because of how much work goes into it. And this is actually it's still very light bodied. I feel like there isn't any weight or heaviness, but the concentration of different fruit flavors and earthiness that's going on, I find it really interesting, and still has freshness as well. Yeah,
there's also gaminess to the wine.
You're so right. I said about that smoked toast note.
Yes.
Now I'm going to steal your suggestion, and it's even got maybe a layer of like overcooked bacon. The bacon fat when it gets really slightly goes towards that burnt side. Yes. I'm taking that. I've taken yours and mine. I'm putting it together. I've created a new tasting note. There we go.
Super.
Yeah, but it's great. That's really good value because Pinot Noir, it really is hard. And actually, because it's going on the more savoury side rather than the fruity side, I think that is exactly where Pinot Noir should be. So my question to you is there anything that you think about in terms of balancing the expression of the grape's natural characteristics, the red fruit, the slight earthiness, with your own stylistic choices when you're crafting Pinot Noir? I know you already said you don't want too much concentration colour because you don't want it to go too brown. That's one thing. Is there anything else that you personally are thinking about?
Yeah, the thing is, people judge a wine always on colour. Although I think Pinot Noir should not be judged on colour. Yes, I would like to see a little bit more dark, but still retaining the brightness of the fruit. I'd like to see a little bit more colour in the wine. But that's on the village. We're working mostly with younger vineyards. It's vineyards that's not settled yet. So because we want that primary fruit as well. And also with young vineyards, you don't have the concentration. You're going to over-extract young vineyards very quickly. And when you do that, you're going to go from nice, bright and dark fruit to broody, and then you're going to get that sort of very compote kind of characters if you go over.
Right, yeah.
But then immediately you're going to lose a sense of place. You're never going to have a sense of place, because then anybody can make wine from overripe grapes, but you lose the identity very quickly and everything tastes the same.
Yeah.
So for me, that's one thing that I'd like not to do in my wines. I'd like my wines to have an identity. And also, although this is Vinache, you still want it to have a sense of place. Although the focus is much more on primary fruit, you still want wine to have a sense of place.
Yeah.
From a winemaking and what I want, when I worked at Chateau Margaux, I actually was still a student, and I took extended leave from university to spend 6 weeks there. And
we haven't talked about that. This is good. Tell me about your time there.
So I met Paul Cluver actually through my father-in-law. I was still just dating my wife at the time, and he said, would you like to meet Paul Cluver? And I said, of course. And he said, he came to visit the property, and this was in 1994. And I met him, and he said, if you want to come spend some time at Chateau Margaux, here's my business card, send me it. It was still in the days of faxes, there was an email.
What's that?
There wasn't emails yet, it was pre.
Why didn't you just Facebook him? Couldn't you send him a WhatsApp?
No, there wasn't Facebook. There wasn't WhatsApp. It was pre the internet, and now I'm giving my age away. But anyway, so I then contacted him, and he invited me to spend some time with there. And I remember just before I returned to South Africa, we were walking to a restaurant in the Entre de Mer, and I asked him, and I said, listen, I'm going to go back to finish my degree. What in his mind is the 3 most important things in winemaking?
Okay, I want to know this.
What should I look for in wine? And walking in after a while, he said to me, I think the first thing is balance. Okay. And I think the second is balance. And I think...
Is the third thing balance?
And the third is balance.
I could have given you that.
And for me, it's actually, when you've got a wine that's balanced, you're going to have a great wine. So whether it's the balance between the fruits and the structure, or between the fruits and the acidity and the sugar and the acidity, and balance for each style of wine is going to be different. And if you can recognize that and you can find that balance, you're going to have a great wine.
Love that.
So for me, when making wine, when I blend different components, I look at the balance, and because a balanced wine will always outlast a wine that's a fruit bowl, and which is not balanced. And
I love that. Okay.
So I'd rather have a wine that's slightly understated but balanced. But when tasting that wine, you're always going to go and say, well, there's something else that I need to discover. I'm going to taste it again. I'm going to savor it. Whereas if it's obvious, it's in your face, you're going to get bored with it very quickly. You're going to drink the wine, you're going to move to something else. Whereas if you've got a wine that's understated, that's balanced, that's elegant, you're going to taste that wine, and before you know it, you've actually ordered a second bottle. And that's what I want.
And it keeps the winery going.
Exactly.
Well, so it might be the really obvious answer to this question now, but what is your opinion on the importance of oak in aging Pinot Noir? And how do you approach it? I assume, again, you're looking for balance, but I just wonder with Pinot Noir being a much more delicate grape than, as an example, you would have been in Chateau Margaux working with Bordeaux barrels, with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, bigger, bolder varieties. So how, from everything you've learned in Chateau Margaux and the idea of balance, do you bring that to putting what is like the Seven Flags that sees a lot more oak? What are you doing when you're thinking about that?
So So fortunately, I also worked in Burgundy, and I've travelled to Burgundy.
Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
I worked in Alles Corton with a producer called Contenard.
Okay.
And then also lately, I think the last time I was in Bordeaux was in 2004. Mm-hmm. The last time I was in Burgundy is 2019 prior to COVID, and hopefully I'll be there by the end of the year. Before the end of the year, I'll be definitely back in Burgundy.
Fab.
I tend to go to Burgundy at least twice every 3 years. So I go to Burgundy a lot lately because that's where I believe that,
I think they know what they're doing.
I think so. And they've been doing it for quite a while. So
a little while.
But even in Burgundy, the amount of near oak varies from producer to producer and vineyard to vineyard. So I think that's firstly is key. But for me, as a young winemaker, 15, 20 years ago, at the time, the early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, more oak was always deemed better. If you look at wines worldwide, there was much more focus on oak. The cooperages made a lot of money, and it was sexy to have a wine that was oaked. It was, and also it was recognizable. Then you actually had to wait quite a long time for the wine to show its true colors, but less is more, in my opinion, on oaking. My estate Pinot these days is normally not much more than 20% new oak. Seven Flags might be about 30% new oak, vintage dependent, and on Chardonnay, slightly more, about 25% new oak on Chardonnay. I think a little bit of new oak is important because it gives freshness to the wine. New oak has got more tannin components, which actually helps with the freshness of the wine and helps with longevity. But what you don't want is you don't want a wine that tastes like oak. A good friend of mine, winemaker of Jordan wines in Stellenbosch, Gary Jordan, always says he hates it when he has to be a carpenter before he can taste wine. And I think that is important.
That's a good quote.
You don't want oak to dominate. You want oak to support the wine. You want actually oak to elevate the wine and not, And lately, we work on our Pinot Noir, we only work with blonde or very light toasted barrels. So
you're not even going medium. So you're not even
going medium. So now the easiest way for a cooper to hide bad oak is to give it a heavier toasting. The heavier the toasting, the more faults you can hide, because you're going to get this toastiness in the wine, and it's going to hide, mistakes. And also, when using blonde or light toasted barrels, you have to be sure that the wood has been seasoned properly before they made the barrel. So your relationship with the cooper becomes very important.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that's also one of the reasons why I go to Burgundy quite often, because when I go, I'd like to go and visit the coopers to make sure that it's a relationship you build with those guys. I might not be their biggest client, but I'd like to believe that I'm an important client. And
I love
and
that.
just going to visit them, shows to them I value their business, and hopefully they value mine as well.
Of course. And what coopers, just for people that are getting all geeky on wine barrels, what coopers are you working with?
We work mostly with Cava, Trémont, Chassin, François Frère, and a little bit of Mercury. So it's all coopers.
Oh, and I know a lot about François Frère, so that one I'm aware
François
of.
Frère, I've been using them ever since the day I started. And for us, they're all based in Burgundy. They all make barrels for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and all of them, actually, the coopers also have visited me in South Africa.
Ah, that's nice.
So there is a relationship.
It's not the worst place. It's not the worst thing to have to come and visit you in Elgin. I can absolutely say it's probably the best wine region I've ever visited. It really is. It's sensational that, you said the fauna, the flora, the nature, the quality of the wines, the cost of the wines. They're so affordable for what you're getting. The food scene is like something that people aren't talking about, and it's just absolutely brilliant. For me,
the food scene in Cape Town, Stellenbosch, in the Western Cape where we live, is absolutely amazing. It's world class. It is absolutely world class.
Totally
Yes.
is. You can go for what should be like a Michelin star meal in London that would set you back, say, £250. And here you'll have the same thing in South Africa for maybe £70. This is for the two people. You know, it's brilliant. I did that a few times. It was wonderful.
And if you add the wine pairing menu, it might be £100.
Yeah, absolutely fair enough. But you know, it's true. You really can afford it. Now, Andries, I'm going to slowly finish off with you. You've been fantastic explaining, you know, your story, Paul Cluver's story, and actually giving us some extra information on Pinot Noir and your decisions. But now I want to finish with a fun question, which is, if you could time travel to any wine drinking period in history, which era would you visit? And of course, why?
Ooh. It's a difficult question, because, every time period has got,
it's virtues.
We have pre-war, we have post, Second War. But probably I would like to go to the 1800s, sort of mid-1800s, because...
You mean during phylloxera?
Pre-phylloxera, actually.
In Europe?
Pre-phylloxera.
Okay, the early 1800s. Okay.
Because technology was really primitive. But the people still made amazing wines, And how? I've had the privilege to taste wines from pre-1900 a few times. One was a port, one was a Madeira, and one was a still wine. And it is still amazing how those wines matured. And also, technology was very primitive, but it shows me that the people knew the vineyard, because they knew. If you look at the Cistercian monks making wine at Courgeot in Burgundy for centuries. So for them, it was much more about their knowledge of vineyards and viticulture that actually made the wine than technology. So, it would have been amazing. And that would have been, ask them. That would be amazing, yes.
How did you figure out that this block was better than that? And I guess, was it just literally time? Yes. Keep on tasting, keep on trying. Who knows? Well, what a good answer.
And a lot of winemaking, because was also luck. Things happened. How did they replicate that? When they realized this is working better than that, how did they replicate that sort of kind of things?
Amazing. Lovely. I love that answer. Andries, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Everyone go and buy some Paul Cluver wines because they're delicious. And I'll be back for my hike at some point.
You're more than welcome. More than welcome.
Thank you.
All the best.
You are brilliant. Have a lovely day. Thank you and take care of yourself.
Same to you.
Okay.
Thank
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So I hope you've all learned a little something extra and new about Pinot Noir. Because next week, I'm going to be hopping back across to Stellenbosch and I'm going to be talking with Kannenkop, the winery that is known for Pinotage. Now, Pinotage is considered South Africa's signature grape variety. It was created back in 1925 by crossing Pinot Noir and Sanso, which was known at the time as Hermitage, hence the name. So you're going to want to join me next week where we're going to talk about the full history of this grape variety, where it's going, what does it really taste like, what foods is it good with, can it age, are there such a thing as Pinotage clones now? And I can promise you one thing, after next week's episode, you will be as much a believer in Pinotage as I am. Now, to finish off, I have a wine quote for you, and I found one by, I think, a wine educator, perhaps, called Joel Fleischmann, and he says, "Great Pinot Noir is the most romantic of wines, with so voluptuous a perfume, so sweet an edge, and so powerful a punch that, like falling in love, they make the blood run hot and the soul wax embarrassingly poetic." If that doesn't get you excited about Pinot Noir, I don't know what will. That is it for today, wine friends. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and looking forward to next week's. If you are enjoying these episodes, don't forget to like, share with your wine-loving friends, leave a wonderful comment on Apple Podcasts, a rating on Spotify or whichever app you're listening to. Screenshot if you're listening on your phone and put it up on your socials. Share the wine love. Embrace the opportunities and challenges that come your way this week. Question that glass of wine you have, dig a little deeper and find the story. And I'll see you all back here next Monday. Until then, cheers to you.